All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Elise Hand. I'll be your moderator today. We'll begin with remarks from Premier Tim Houston, and then we'll give those of you in the room and online an opportunity to ask questions. And Premier, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. 2 weeks ago, we introduced the annual budget for Nova Scotia. We brought forward a plan that we believed was honest about the financial situation facing our province and what we could responsibly afford. Since then, Nova Scotians have spoken clearly. Many people told us that they were worried about certain parts of the budget. And I want to start by saying this. On some of the decisions, we got it wrong. And for that, I'm sorry. Because the legislature is still reviewing the budget, we have the opportunity to make adjustments now before it's finalized, and we're going to do just that. My job as Premier is to keep the province safe and to bring people together. I never want Nova Scotians to feel like their government is working against them. In preparing the budget, we focused heavily on the financial pressures facing our province, and we did not do enough ahead of time to explain to Nova Scotians the seriousness of the challenge. But in trying to respond to the financial challenges, we moved too quickly in areas that affect people's daily lives. So after listening to Nova Scotians, as well as my caucus colleagues who fanned out across the province and brought forward concrete examples of where we got it wrong, after listening to all of them and Nova Scotians, we will restore funding in 3 key areas. First, supports and programming for people with disabilities. Second, supports and programming for seniors. And third, supports for African, Nova Scotian, and Indigenous students seeking to further their education. These programs will have their funding restored through revised estimates that the Minister of Finance will bring forward in the coming days. In total, these changes restore approximately $53.6 million in funding. When we reviewed the impacts, it was clear that these programs make a real difference for seniors, people with disabilities, and students. So restoring that support was the right decision. And restoring that funding ensures access to care, meals, and other supports, and it ensures the opportunity for advanced education. These are all priorities for Nova Scotians, and restoring this funding will increase the deficit in the short term. That's for sure. We started this process with a pretty significant deficit, and restoring this funding will increase that deficit in the short term. But Nova Scotians made it clear that even as we work through the financial challenges we face, we must protect services that people depend on. And I agree, and these changes today will do that. There are other organizations and programs that are affected by the budget, and I know that they will hope today that their funding may also be restored, and they will be disappointed to hear that these changes are limited to the 3 key areas. Specifically to the arts community, even though the program adjustments will remain, you are valued. Art and culture is a big part of what makes this province special. It's a big reason why people want to live here. It's a big reason why others want to come here. And it helps to remind us of who we are as Nova Scotians and why we love being Nova Scotians. The budget tabled 2 weeks ago includes $66 million for the sector, and that funding will remain. This is a significant number, and I don't think it should be lost in the discussion. Nova Scotians can feel confident that their government is supporting the sector. For perspective, that number was $51.5 million in 2021. So under my government, we have been able to do more, and hopefully that upward path can continue in the future. But that doesn't mean I don't wish that we could do more today. I do wish we could do more today, and I sincerely mean that. But it is my hope that as we grow the economy, we get back to a place where we can once again do more. And that really is the bottom line. The larger work remains ahead of us. I'm hopeful that we can come together as Nova Scotians and tackle the real elephant in the room. Because if Nova Scotia is going to sustain the services people depend on, we must grow our economy. And we can grow our economy. There are bigger and brighter days ahead for our province. The real opportunities are in front of us, and they are natural resources in defense and in companies that are already here building their future. So my responsibility is to make sure that we realize those opportunities so we can ultimately look to do more once again. So I'll keep working to build that stronger future Nova Scotians deserve. The deficit got bigger today with this announcement, but it's a risk that we are taking in order to protect some of our most vulnerable. Thank you.
At what point did you start to think or realize that maybe, as you say, you got some things wrong with the cuts that you announced on budget day?
I think the budget process starts months and months ago. It's a difficult process. I've lost a lot of sleep during the budget process for sure. There's a lot of good people doing a lot of work that feed into the budget process. And I think at this moment in time, the process in some areas probably got more clinical when it should have been more human. And I would say that really started to weigh on me, certainly over the last week, as I was hearing from people with very concrete examples, and my caucus was hearing those concrete examples from having, reasonable discussions with people, not to yelling and screaming, but sitting down and people saying this is the impact. So I think it really started to become obvious and weigh heavily, certainly over the last few days.
And so just by extension to that, what can you say about the level of scrutiny that these cuts were put through before the budget was tabled? Do you feel that your cabinet and by extension your caucus had enough time to take a look at this and potentially flag some bear traps for you?
I think in times such as these, there will always be bear traps, number one. I think we have to, the other thing that I've done a lot of reflection on is just thinking of the context of the world in which this budget was tabled. So we have the Trump effect. It's causing a lot of stress for a lot of people. The tariff war. We now have real wars breaking out every day in the Middle East. We have, the price of gas, the fluctuation, the price of power, and the incredible amount of pressures that people are under. And it's almost a little COVID-ish. Like they're looking to their government for support and comfort. And then we tabled a budget that had some cuts in certain areas. That it should not be lost on Nova Scotians that there's $19 billion of spending here. Incredible spending in healthcare. We've made incredible progress in many, many areas. But in some areas, we got it a little wrong on some of the adjustments. And I think it was really down to, in the disability supports for people living with disabilities. If you think about the remedy, it's a court-ordered situation. Certainly over time, it is the case that individuals will get individualized funding and make their decision who they deal with. And then you have the service providers doing good work. So, of course, over time, that's two buckets. Service provider bucket, individualized funding bucket. When you add them together, it's more support. But what we kind of missed was taking down the service provider bucket before the individual spending bucket raises proportionally, because it's going to take time. We kind of created a mismatch on the transition. So we're fixing that. But it was only in some pretty detailed, heartfelt discussions with people once the rubber hit the road that became obvious to me and certainly to the minister.
Premier, how did you arrive at these three categories when, as you say, there are other areas such as arts and culture where people have been also raising their concerns about cuts that affect them?
So we're trying to, in the context of the deficit and responsible spending, we're trying to afford, make sure we do what we can afford. We're doing more than we can afford. That's how we have a deficit. But when we stood back and we really looked at the categories of all of these areas are still getting funding. I think just it's important. If I say the arts sector in particular, we're providing funding to the arts sector, pretty significant. I think it's about $66 million in this budget. That would be up from 51 when we started, right? So there's still a pot of money there. Do we wish we could do more? Of course we wish we could do more. But when we look back and said, okay, if we're going to, if there's areas where we have to, or we should, as humans, do more, it's what are the areas where it impacts a person's daily life, like their absolute ability for food, for support. So we just wanted to kind of focus on, that's how we got to people living with disabilities, supports for seniors, and then the opportunities for advanced education are significant to people's mental health.
And this $53.6 million that's restored, does that completely restore all the cuts that were made that affect disabilities, seniors, and African Nova Scotian and Indigenous students?
Yeah, that's my understanding, yeah.
Premier, how do you think the rating agencies will react to your announcement today?
The deficit got bigger. It's a real thing. Like the deficit is kind of an abstract concept for most Nova Scotians. They're just trying to live, right? But the deficit is something that as elected leaders we have to be conscious of, and it got bigger today. I think when you look across the country at the deficits that are being tabled and the per capita, we're right kind of in that range. Maybe some are bigger and some are smaller, but I don't know that this change will trigger an immediate reaction from them. They're going to look at it, no doubt. But that's why I think I say, like, the bigger work lays ahead. We have incredible opportunities, and if we can work together to grow the economy, when there's more for everybody, there's going to be more for everybody, right? But we have to get moving on the economic opportunities that we have, which are significant. They are absolutely significant. We're making progress, but I think that the revenue side of the equation can't and shouldn't be lost in the discussion.
Mayor, when did it become clear to you that you were going to make this change for these three specific groups?
Well, I think as I think it was Michael asked that. So I think it's the level of pressure that we have felt as elected leaders and as people working in the departments. Like, this is an incredibly stressful time for the civil servants on these budgets. I think, like, just order of magnitude, I think the initial numbers that were submitted would have had a deficit over $2 billion. So we knew that wouldn't work. So we had to get it to a manageable area. And we tried to do that the best we could. We did the best we could. But when the rubber hits the road and people can actually see the direct impact and articulate that, I listen carefully to that. So we definitely were listening carefully. I had a lot of, I would say, very reasonable, rational discussions with people who just kind of laid it out for me, certainly over the last, since it's been tabled. And I think caucus had the opportunity on the weekend and last week talking to their constituents. They've been in pretty constant contact, but creating business cases of what these impacts might do to people. And it just, when we saw some of those impacts, it just said, I can't accept that. We try to govern with, we have a big responsibility. I try to kind of, there's one kind of rule that I always have kind of had, and I try to instill in my kids too, is like, can I put my hand on my heart and say we did the right thing there? And I think when I put my hand on my heart and I said, what will the impact be on people living with disabilities? I couldn't live with that. When I put my hand on my heart on some of the other sectors, I said, I wish we could do more, but I have to live with that. So.
Looks like cutting grants is not going to get you back to a balanced budget. What are you going to do next year?
Raise the revenues. That's the thing. Like, the real work is ahead. There's no question that over the fullness of time, the government can and only should do so much. But over the fullness of time, that expands. You add a couple grants here, you add a couple programs here, you do a little more, you pilot something. Well, even a pilot is in the minds of a lot of people an expectation that it survives forever. So there's no question that government grows. And there's obviously no question either that when you try to reel it back in, it's tough, right? It's tough. We see it, right? But so we have to do what we can and do a little bit more because we're humans. We care. That's why we're here. But the answer to the financial sustainability of our province is not through arguing over what cuts to make. The answer is in growing the revenues and recognizing the opportunities that are before us.
The biggest opportunity is, sorry if I could just.
So, like, I see incredible opportunities, obviously, in natural gases, natural gas, onshore, offshore oil. The onshore stuff would be, you're right, okay? A lot of the opportunities are, let's call them medium to longer term. But some are short term. But even the medium to longer term, if we take the offshore oil and gas, if we can attract people and get them interested in taking a bid, then they'll start to spend money right away. Like, the oil might not flow or the gas might not flow for a few years, but the office will get set up and the people will get hired and the subcontractors will be starting to do stuff. So I think it's all part of the grand momentum. We have to get the ball rolling. Once the ball is rolling, then it will roll. And it's starting to roll. We're just kind of nudging it a little bit. It's just...
You can have our last question.
Somebody else can take it. That was essentially my question.
Premier, the budget that you tabled 2 weeks ago has the 4-year sustainability plan. And of course, as you know, year 2, year 3, year 4, the cuts are much, much larger than what you're doing in this first year. How will this experience that you and your caucus have gone through in the last 2 weeks inform how you will approach those out years as you try to decide where you should cut, where you shouldn't cut, what you can live without, what you can't live without?
So a lot of the spending of government is wages, it's people, actual people with families. So some of that, and I think a good portion of that is natural attrition. So that's kind of just going to unfold. We got to make sure that we can still provide the level of services. But I think to your bigger point, I think we'll learn from this for sure. We'll probably go back to the drawing board a little bit on how we engage Nova Scotians earlier in the process and talk to them about how do we work together to get through this, right? And be honest about the problem, and then work with them to find solutions. And I think we can do obviously a lot better than we did this time, but I think we can make pretty good progress on that. But I think what and I did a lot of soul searching. I think what happened is we started to present solutions to a problem that most Nova Scotians didn't really know existed. And that's the financial challenges and the crisis we have on the finances. So we'll work with them. I think the problem will be more evident over, through this process. There's certainly, look, I'm getting a lot of messages from people, particularly younger people. Don't raise my taxes. I can't afford it. A young lady this morning called me, said, my husband and I finally just saved up to buy a house. We support the arts, everything we do everything we can. We're stretched. Please don't raise our taxes, right? So that's a voice that is probably not going to appear at a protest march, but it's an important voice in the discussion. So the whole revenue discussion, generation of revenues, is really important. The doing what we can but controlling expenses is really important. And there are always going to be certain groups that I wish we could do something for. But I have to understand that government has a limit too. So I hope today people feel there'll be certain groups of people that can feel better about their role and their place in Nova Scotia. And even those that we didn't restore funding, I hope they know that we wish we could, and maybe there'll be a better day when we can. But thanks,
That's all
everyone.
the time we have. Thanks, everybody.